All right. Well, I wanted to just follow up a little bit. I'm on my way to Asheville, North Carolina, and before Shabbat, I'd done a video driving and had a lot of background noise, and just didn't feel like it was something I wanted to upload because it's just such poor quality. I'm playing around with some new cameras here, and I thought I was going to get some better audio than I actually found out when I played it. So, anyways, I sent out my newsletter yesterday, talked about some different issues regarding end times. Obviously, a lot of interesting things happened in Syria over the past couple weeks, actually. What we have now is the Assad regime is collapsed. He fled the country. He's in Moscow, according to most reports. And now we have various groups that have just essentially taken over the country. Now, they're proxies for Turkey, the United States, and the Mossad is involved, as well as the United Kingdom. Some Gulf states have supported some of this. So there's a lot of hands in the pie right now. And of course, this has been something the United States wanted to accomplish for at least 15 years. What most people don't realize is that the United States, the CIA, and their proxies have been in Syria for quite some time. We've actually controlled approximately a third of the country. We've siphoned off their oil and gas, and we have basically taken their wheat as well. The whole purpose of all this was to impose maximum pressure, as former CIA director Mike Pompeo likes to put it. They wanted to put the squeeze on so hard that they were going to make the people of Syria revolt. Of course, we've seen a lot of celebration now happening in Syria, but I think that the party is going to be short-lived, because what a lot of people don't realize is the mainstream media has been describing these groups as rebel groups, as if this is just some grassroots rebellion that's taken place to come against the Assad regime because they're so bad that people just eventually got frustrated and rebelled. And really, it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's not as organic as they try to make it seem. What we have here is various Sunni Islamic groups that have been, again, funded and supported by the United States, Turkey, the UK, Israel. These are Islamic fundamentalist groups that kind of cut people's heads off, okay? So, in fact, they're really just a rebrand of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Nusra, these various organizations that have just kind of folded over and reinvented themselves over the years. That's what we've got going on in Syria right now. So I think it's going to be a very, very complicated and potentially bad situation for the people of Syria, in particular the Christians in Syria. There's a lot of Christians in Syria, and I don't know if people realize that, but I mentioned in my newsletter they found one of the oldest home churches in Syria in an archaeological dig. And of course, you know, if you read the New Testament, you read about Paul going to Damascus, and his whole purpose was to basically dismantle the followers of Yeshua and persecute them in Damascus because there were so many there. And of course, Damascus is also famous because there were some Dead Sea Scroll groups that had gone to Damascus, and they really had some interesting ideas. Obviously, I don't agree with them, but they felt that they'd rejected Jerusalem, and they were going to go basically set up shop in Damascus, start a new temple, new sacrifices, a new covenant. They actually talked about, and of course that was laid out in the Damascus document. I've quoted that at various times in books and newsletter articles and things like that. And of course, I caution people about the Dead Sea Scrolls documents because they can be very helpful, very informative. In fact, I've even quoted the Damascus document to show that Yeshua actually taught against some of the things that they taught in there. So obviously there's some similarities because they look to the Torah, the prophets, but they were pre-Yeshua, pre-Messiah, and they kind of came up with their own doctrines, their own ideas about how they would achieve this new covenant that Jeremiah talked about, and they were going to do it on their own in Damascus. So, anyways, there's a lot of history in Damascus as far as the faith goes, and we'll see what these Sunnis have in mind when the dust settles. But Israel went in very shortly after the Assad regime fell, and I've heard upwards of 450 bombings of various facilities and military installations and such. They basically are continuing their decapitation strategy, and they invoked it on Syria immediately after the regime fell, and they've moved further into the Golan Heights. So I think we're going to see a land grab. I think we are going to have a failed state. I think we're going to see Syria dismantled and maybe fractured as a nation. And you know, one thing people don't realize is that Syria was essentially formed as part of the restructuring, the dissolution and restructuring of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was vast and quite extensive. And I had an opportunity to go to Istanbul last year, and that was really the head of the headquarters of the Ottoman Empire, which lasted for centuries and covered a vast swath of land. That once the empire dismantled, I mean, there were all these nations that were essentially formed in a day by the stroke of a pen. And I know that a lot of Christians like to quote Isaiah 66 as a basis for, you know, the miracle of the modern state of Israel being formed and fulfillment of prophecy. But what they don't realize is that Israel was not the only nation that was formed after the Ottoman Empire was dissolved. There were various countries that received mandates, and Israel and Egypt and Jordan were part of the British mandate. And when the British divided up the land and basically released that mandate, Israel became a nation, and Egypt later became a nation. And the plan was for the Palestinian state to become a nation as well, but after the United Nations vote, that there was war between the parties, and essentially Israel expanded its territory beyond what the United Nations resolution had planned for a Palestinian state and a modern state of Israel. And so that's when you hear the 1967 lines and the various lines that they have. It's because there was a plan, but the Arabs felt it was not fair the way that the land and the geography was apportioned, and so they did not agree to the vote. And so, of course, the Jews agreed to the vote because they got a pretty good they got a pretty good deal. So they were all for it. The Arabs were not. Their position was basically, well, we've lived here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you know, all these European Jews are coming in and colonizing and settling the land. I believe that when the Balfour Declaration was written in 1917, that there was about a 5% Jewish population in what they called Palestine. and that the Arabs were well in the majority. But obviously, world circumstances happened, geopolitical events happened, which resulted in uh, more Jewish settlers coming into the land, and of course, the Holocaust was a major impetus for them fleeing Europe, and of course, the Zionists held up Palestine as the place for them to go. That was the place that they would be safe, and so you see through time people just flooding in, Jews flooding into the land, and ultimately, overwhelming the local population. So when Israel declared its independence in 1948, they did it right at the same time as the British withdrawal from the land, and of course that's when they claimed their land and even more. And the history behind even Gaza, the Gaza event that we see and we've seen over the past year. There was what's called the Nakba, where I would encourage you all to look it up, because hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced from their villages and basically corralled into Gaza and the West Bank and other areas. And a lot of those villages that were attacked by Hamas on October 7th were former villages of Palestinians. And so those Palestinians now, their descendants, were now living in Gaza, which some had called the largest open-air prison in the world. And no question, it was a containment zone where they couldn't get out. They just had to live within that framework of the fenced-in system. So, yeah, a lot of things happened when after Israel declared its independence, and we're seeing the effects of them even today with the situations going on in the West Bank and in Gaza. So, in any event, these I think the point of my newsletter yesterday was just to show that a lot of this has been orchestrated. Okay, and there are people just kind of playing into the narrative without really understanding the history that's involved here. And so there were a lot of nations born in a day throughout this whole process when the Ottoman Empire was dismantled. Saudi Arabia, like I said, Jordan, the Gulf states, Libya, all these, Egypt, many states were just born or created by the stroke of a pen. And so now to see Syria dismantled, basically, we'll see what happens there. But anyways, there's a prophecy in Isaiah, which I kind of started talking about, that Damascus would become a ruinous heap. And of course, it's close. I mean, if you look at some areas of Damascus, especially the outskirts of Damascus, it's pretty well destroyed. But it basically, the prophecy, the way I interpret it, is that Damascus will no longer be functioning as a city. And I even did the research years ago on, well, could it have been talking about Aram Damascus? Because Aram Damascus was the region way back when. So I often thought, well, was it talking about the kingdom and not the city? But if you look at the text, it's clearly talking about the city of Damascus, which is one of the oldest cities that's been continuously occupied in the world. So I don't think we've seen it yet. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think Damascus is a ruinous heap. It may be, and that's why we keep a close eye on things. We'll see what happens here, but I think that's a prophecy that has not been fulfilled yet. But we'll keep our eyes. It's just incredible that just in my lifetime, all of a sudden we've seen this focus on that region. Even I remember hearing people talk about how Turkey was going to be one of those nations that was going to come against Israel, and for the longest time Turkey was just kind of asleep. a sleeping giant. They actually have an enormous army, but they weren't doing too much on the world scene. And now all of a sudden, Turkey has taken a very active role in taking down Syria. And of course, this will be very interesting because Turkey is a member of NATO. It seemed like for a time that Turkey was interested in joining the BRICS and aligning with China and Russia. But of course, Russia was a major backer of the Assad regime along with Iran. And so what Israel just did could be seen as a betrayal against Russia. So anyways, there's a very dynamic situation going on right now in the Middle East, and we just keep our eyes open. But at the end of the day, and I guess this was the bottom line of my newsletter, my latest newsletter that I sent out on, I guess, December 15th. At the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference for those who follow Yeshua, because last Friday was actually the feast or the fast of the 10th month that we read about in Zechariah. And the fast of the 10th month occurs on day 10 of month 10, of course, and it was last Friday on the Creator's calendar. Now, I know the Jewish calendar is a year off, a month off, but that's because they don't use the sun and the moon as required by Genesis 1:14. They just use a calculation. And that's one thing I don't think a lot of people realize is that the rabbinic calendar, the Jewish calendar, it doesn't follow the Torah. It just creates it's just a formula that they use. It doesn't use the lights in the sky that Yah placed there for that very reason. So I know a lot of people defer to the Jewish calendar when they get into their Hebrew roots or into the Messianic movement, and they just say, oh, I want to follow the appointed time, so I'll use this calendar. But that's just a straight up error, because that calendar, people that want to start following the Torah and obeying the Torah, and immediately they deviate away from the Torah. And that's one of the dangers of following the rabbis and the Pharisees. That's one of the problems that Yeshua had with them, is that they were ignoring the commandments while elevating their traditions and their customs above the commandments. And so it's a pretty big mistake to look to Judaism for anything if you're trying to follow the Torah, because Judaism is just its own separate religion. It's not the same faith that Moses mediated to the Israelites. It's not the same faith that Abraham had. It's not the same faith of Joshua, any of the patriarchs. I'm currently working on my book, The Israel Dilemma, and this morning I was doing some editing before I got on the road, and I was making that point that any of the patriarchs, if they came back now and you thrust them into a synagogue, they wouldn't have a clue what was going on there unless somebody pulled out a Torah scroll and they saw the Torah scroll. They might say, oh, okay, I know that. But as far as the customs and the traditions and the kippas and the way they dress and all that, it doesn't bear any resemblance. There's no priesthood, there's no temple, and their Talmud trumps the Torah. I mean, they follow the Talmud. They don't really claim to follow the Torah, although they dance around with it and they read from it. Ultimately, their religious text is the Talmud. So it's a different religion, just like those of us that were born in Christianity and raised in Christianity, and then we look at the faith taught by Yeshua, and we say, well, this is all sun worship. This is a different religion. It's not the same faith. It's not the same walk that Yeshua and his disciples had. It's the same thing with Judaism. It's just a different religion. So we can't be following their calendar, and they are a month off, so they will be observing the fast of the 10th month, next month. But it happened on last Friday, and it commemorated the day that that Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army surrounded Jerusalem and began the siege. So that's a day of fasting and mourning. It's a traditional day of fasting and mourning. And in Zechariah, of course, the people had returned by that time. They'd returned from the Babylonian exile, and they asked, should we still be fasting on these various days, including the 10th, they would call it. Should we still be fasting? We're back. We've rebuilt the temple. It's all in the past, so should we still be fasting? And Zechariah, through Zechariah, gave a promise that those days they would become gladness and joy and joyful feasts and just wonderful times. So he didn't say to stop, but he didn't say to stop fasting at that point. And of course, we know from Daniel and the 70 weeks given to him by Gabriel that there would be a time when Jerusalem and the temple would be rebuilt and Messiah would come, but then there would be a flood, that there would be desolation after that. So Zechariah didn't tell them to stop fasting. And there's fasting to this day, even though there's been the establishment of the modern state of Israel. Of course, most people should realize that that's not a restoration, as we saw when Judah returned from Babylon. Of course, Jeremiah had said it's going to be 70 years. Babylon's going to be punished, and then you'll be able to return. And Gabriel gave the 70 weeks from the decree that was issued to return. So there were various prophecies and messengers that were all pointing to the Yahudim returning to the land and rebuilding. But that wasn't going to be the end of it. Of course, we all know that Yeshua came right when Daniel was told, according to Gabriel, right in that time frame. But he was rejected. The king came, and they rejected the king. So it was all judged and destroyed. And this time there was no promise of a return. This time there was no prophet saying, "Okay, you screwed up. It's going to be another 500 years or 1,000 years or what have you." There was nothing giving them a time frame. There were still prophecies about David restoring the tribes, the Messiah restoring the tribes. But it would be a restoration of both the house of Israel and the house of Judah. We saw that in Ezekiel 36, 37. We've seen it in Hosea 1, Isaiah. There's just a lot of prophecies about covenant of peace, covenant of shalom being instituted, and shalom meaning a fullness, a completeness. And that's really, when you get down to it, that's what shalom means. It's a completion of fullness. So, and that's only going to happen through Messiah, Yeshua. So we were to continue fasting because they haven't been turned into feasts yet. And they still haven't. And they won't until Yeshua actually restores the kingdom. So we should be looking for Yeshua returning. And that's the end of it all. That's the bottom line, is that he told us what to do. He told us to be doing the work until the Master returns. He told us to go into the nations and preach the good news. The good news that, and what is the good news? The good news that Yah sent the king. The king came. The king was killed, yet he was resurrected. And so now he's renewed the covenant, and that renewed covenant is available to the nations. And that's really the big picture that most every religion misses here. You've got Judaism that really presents Jewishness as a members-only club. They are the chosen people, and it's all about them and getting them back in the land. And you've got a lot of Christian Zionists who just bought right into that, as if getting the Jewish people into the land so they can live in the land doesn't matter what we do to anybody else, as long as those Jews get in that land and live in that land. That's all that matters. Of course, that's not part of the renewed covenant. That's not the gospel. That's not the good news. The good news is that the nations who were divided and separated by languages and geography and cultures and religions after the Tower of Babel, those nations can be restored to Yah. And that's what it's all about. That's why when we read about the Tower of Babel, the next we read is the genealogy of Terah and Abram. Because Terah was called out. He was called out of Babylon. In fact, the word, it's terach. And ruach is at the heart of that word. It's the spirit, wind. And that's why terach can actually mean wanderer. So Terach was called out of Babylon, and he never made it out. Haran is still on the east side of the Euphrates River, and that was kind of a border city of Babylon. You had to cross over to get outside of Babylon. And Terah stopped short in Haran and died there. And then Yah called Abram to then go, and Abram went. And that's why we read about Terah and Abram right after the Tower of Babel, because the point was Yah wanted to heal this divide and restore the nations to him, and he was going to choose Terah and Abram eventually to fulfill that task. And that's why we read about that them right after the event, because that's the solution to the problem was presented there. So the good news is that it's not just about the Jewish people, and really Jewish is not even the appropriate term, because Jewish is a fairly new term. If we're talking about the chosen people, we're talking about Israel. And Israel, which split into two houses, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. House of Israel was punished, exiled by the Assyrians, and remains in exile to this day. That's why Yeshua said, I came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that's why he sent his disciples into the nations. He chose 12, and then he chose 70. He was showing the pattern, 12 representing Israel, 70 representing the nations. We read about that in Luke. He was doing things very specifically and methodically to present his message and his purpose. So the good news is that the covenant made with Israel is now available for the nations. And so no matter how prophecy gets fulfilled, we have our mission. It doesn't matter if Damascus is a ruin or not right now. I mean, there's nothing wrong with keeping an eye on these prophecies and wondering when they're going to be fulfilled, but we have our marching orders, and Yeshua gave prophecies concerning his servants, and the servant that was found sleeping, the servant that was found not investing the talents wisely, burying them in a hole, the servant that was found doing the master's work and building his kingdom and multiplying his kingdom. That's what we're supposed to be doing, no matter what is happening around us in the world. So we have to keep a focus on what our mission is, so that we don't lose track, that we don't lose sight, we don't veer off the path, but we are found faithful. We're found to be faithful servants when the master returns. So if you didn't see the newsletter, that was the gist of it. But if you want to get on the mailing list, certainly ShemaIsrael.net is the website, and Yisrael has a Y, so it's ShemaYisrael.net. All you have to do is go to the website, and there's a pop-up menu that allows you to subscribe. And I think that's good if people do that, because it's a good way to stay in touch. I do videos, but not as frequent as I used to. It's a lot of work to actually write these newsletters while I'm writing books and while I'm, operating my life. So, the newsletters go out. I was reading them for a while, and I may continue to do that at some point when I have a little more time. But the newsletters are a good way for me to keep weekly contact with people. And for those of you that may have been on my newsletter and haven't received one, I did a changeover a couple months ago using a new server, and I had some people that said they got bumped from the list for some reason, and it actually occurs throughout the years. I've heard people say quite regularly that they were dropped from the mailing list, and that's nothing that I do. So if you do get dropped from the list, I mean, I send them out every week, and I basically, I've gotten to the point where if I run out of time and I can't do one, I'll probably still send one out and say I don't have a lot of time, so I'm not sending one. But so you'll probably hear from me either way, and in any event, I'll try to give a quick update, even if I can't do a full newsletter. But so far, so good. I've been able to do a video or a newsletter consistently for the last several years, every Shabbat. So, and I know people look forward to that, and so I try to be consistent with that. But it's pretty busy, and sometimes I'm really tight for time. But so if you were on that list and you're watching this video and you haven't got anything for weeks or months, you need to go back on and just resubscribe. It's free. And if it ever happens to you in the future, just keep that in mind, that you may have to go resubscribe if you don't get one. Because again, I'll try to send something out every day or every Shabbat, even if I don't have a full newsletter. So, anyways, well, the weather's kind of cleared up a little bit. I'm on my way to, like I said, to Asheville, North Carolina. We're going to drop off a load of supplies. We went down to Florida. We did some relief work there in October. Milton and Helene had kind of hit really in the coastal Bend region of Florida. Helene was a little more to the north, and Milton was down to the south. So we did some of that. Then I've been really busy with my office, and so I'm driving down from New York right now. I'm going to drop off some supplies, assess the situation, and then we'll probably come back up another time, and wherever we see if there's a particular place that has some special needs, we'll try to fill those needs. But yeah, just a quick update. Prison ministry is continuing full board. I mean, we get constant requests for books from prisoners, and we are sending out full sets to. We kind of shifted gears. We're trying to send out full sets of the Walk in the Light series to prison libraries. We just think it's a little easier that way, that we can handle the situation when we get individual prisoner requests that we try to comply with, but sometimes we'll just send out a full set to the prison library so that everybody can share. We've got a new crop that's about to be harvested in Kenya of beans. We help feed some orphans in Kenya, and so that's going very well at this point. And I'm just finishing up my 17th book, The Israel Dilemma, and that's going to be, I think, a really important one. It touches on some of the issues that we discussed here about Israel. Like I say, with the use of the word Jew and trying to apply a modern day Jew to the ancient assembly of Israel, there's a disconnect there, because even defining Jew is a very multifaceted thing, and I get into that in the book. And so people need to kind of untangle things. And even to this day, I see teachers refer to ancient Israelites as Jewish, and it just adds to the confusion. We've got to start, you know, when I first got into this walk, I started, one of the biggest things, I'll tell you, probably the most important thing was the shofar. I went to Israel for the first time, and I saw all these shofars, and I don't know what they were. They were just, animal horns and all over the place. And I said, "What is this thing?" And I said, "Oh, it's a shofar." And I started looking up that word, and I realized most every place in the scriptures where there was a shofar, it was replaced with the word trumpet. And almost always the word trumpet is a shofar, except when it's talking about the silver trumpets that were used to call the assembly, the two silver trumpets. But other than that, pretty much every time you read trumpet in your Bible, it's really shofar. And I was amazed at how this one word, all growing up reading the Bible, whenever I read the scriptures and it said trumpet, I'm thinking about, Louis Armstrong with his with his trumpet, and to realize that one word could make such a difference. And I saw, wow, it wasn't this silver or brass handmade musical instrument, but rather it was a part of an animal, a horn of an animal, a ram's horn. Just that one translation difference completely changed how I perceived things and how I understood the scriptures in many passages. And the same thing holds true for the church. We read church in the English, but it was really ecclesia, the Greek word that referred to the kahal, which, the Hebrew kahal, which is the assembly, which most of the time referred to the set apart assembly, and most of the time it was Israel. So I'd been reading about the church, thinking, oh yeah, that's Christian, so the Bible's talking about Christians, when it's really referencing the set apart assembly, which would have been Israel, those in covenant. So these words are very important. Of course, the name of Yah, being replaced with the Lord, and the name of Yeshua being replaced with Isus. And I could go on and on and on, but words are important, and people that have gotten into this movement, I still see people saying, Yeshua Jesus, and it's like, wait, no, come on, you've got to stop mixing these things. It's not Yeshua Jesus. Jesus is an adulterated name of the Messiah. And like I say, if you're going to use an English name, at least use Joshua. If you want to refer to the Messiah using an English name, I don't recommend it. But if you at least be linguistically honest and use Joshua, because at least that way people would make the connection, the prophetic connection with why he bore that name. But let's not do this Yeshua Jesus stuff anymore. I just think it's really, really confusing. And again, to just blend the word Jew with ancient Israelite is not proper, and people really need to stop using that word. If you want to talk about a modern Jew who identifies as a Jew, that's fine, but don't try to apply that. Don't say Jesus was Jewish, because he wasn't Jewish. Yeshua was from the tribe of Yehuda. He was an Israelite, and he was a Judean. He spent most of his time in Judea, the Judean, but he wasn't Jewish. He didn't follow the religion of Judaism. He didn't follow the rabbis. His mother wasn't Jewish. His father wasn't Jewish. You know, they were Yahudim. So when you use the word Jewish, it in people's minds it has all the vestiges of the modern you know, religion of Judaism and the culture, the Jewish culture, the modern Jewish culture, and that was not the culture that Yeshua was in. So I remember when I was first, you know, probably college ministry, and oh, there was this bumper sticker, you know, my boss is a Jewish carpenter, and you know, I thought it was cute, and it's so, you know, it's wrong on so many levels. He was a tectone. He was a builder. He was probably a stonemason. You know, I know people think that's crazy, you know, because they understand that Masonic lodges are Luciferian, but the fact of the matter is that they built using stone in that area. There weren't a lot of trees. You know, there were, Solomon had to import trees, the cedars of Lebanon, for the temple. So there aren't a lot of, you know, big trees for building in the land. So, but they used stone, and so Yeshua probably was a pretty burly guy, and he probably was used to building with stone. And of course, you know, that falls in so well with, you know, the stone that the builders rejected shall, you know, become the chief cornerstone, the Rosh Pina, the headstone, and the fact of him building, you know, him going to prepare a place for us and building the New Jerusalem out of living stone. So there's a lot to that we can get if we separate, you know, our boss as a Jewish carpenter. He wasn't Jewish, he wasn't a carpenter, you know. He was a Yahudim, probably stone builder. So anyways, words are important, and I'm digressing, but it's getting a little wet now again on my journey here, so I'm going to pay attention to the road. But it's just a little update, testing my new camera, and hopefully the microphone works this time. And if it does, I'll just upload this as a little update video. And I just want to thank everybody that actually donated so that we could buy the things to take down. And last time we went from Texas to Florida, and now I'm coming down from New York to North Carolina. But I want to thank people for just spontaneously donating. You know, I don't do a big rally cry for donations and such, but to some of you just send them, and it's really refreshing and encouraging when it happens, and I really appreciate it. And I know sometimes I don't always get a response out as I should. We don't have a big, you know, a big organization here, and I like to keep it small. I don't want to become obsessed with growth and marketing and all that kind of stuff, because I think you can lose a lot when you do that. But anyways, thank you all, and I think you know, maybe I'll do these more often if people enjoy getting an update. And again, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter, because that's how you're going to regularly hear from me. And of course, I'm always happy to answer questions as well, so you can always reach out. I have to tell you, the emails are probably, you're going to get a faster response to an email than you will a comment on YouTube, because it just gets a little overwhelming after a while. There's times where you might see me liking a comment a year after you made it, and I apologize for that, but sometimes I just don't get on YouTube as much. I'm also trying to send things on Twitter more. So if you go on X, you can find I've not done anything to market that. I've just started sending some things out on that. So if you're on Twitter or X, you know, you might be interested in that. I have tried to transfer my YouTube videos over to Rumble, and I don't think that's ever really fully taken place, but I'm on Rumble and primarily YouTube at this point, and we'll see how long. They've banned some of my videos because during the COVID situation, I said some things that they didn't like, you know, and I even had a video of mine about the signs in the heavens that they took down, because I made a quick little comment on the vaccine, so it gets crazy. But I'm not going to sit here and cater. I know some people rely on views and likes and all that, and you know, they don't say certain things or do certain things because they don't want to get taken down or banned. And I'm just not going to worry about that. So if I do ever get taken down, that's why I think it's good for you to be on the newsletter mailing list. At least that's the way that we can communicate. And again, if you ever have a message you need to get across to me, Todd@shemaisrael.net is my email. So anyways, love to hear from you, and hopefully we can do this again soon. Right now it's Todd Bennett from ShemaIsrael.net heading south to North Carolina. So long.